When I started homeschooling, I had been a high school English teacher before, and I just could not wait to start homeschooling my daughter. I thought it was going to be the best thing ever. And I remember we came home that first week, and I just basically recreated the classroom at home. She had a little desk that she sat in, and I even made a bulletin board. Y'all, a bulletin board for her room. It was a little caterpillar. I made it out of round pieces of construction paper and had said something about wanting to be a bookworm. It was super cheesy. But anyway, needless to say, in a matter of weeks, we were pretty miserable. She was miserable and I was, and my ideas and dreams of homeschooling just fell flat. And I was very discouraged, very frustrated, didn't know what to. I didn't know any other way to educate. I thought that the classroom model was all there was, but turns out I was very wrong. I tried all different methods. I read all the things, watched all the videos, listened to all the different perspectives on homeschooling methods, and I just spent a tremendous amount of time, energy, and frustration trying to come up with the solution to all the stress and the frustration I was feeling. And I finally, years later, landed on a method of homeschooling called relaxed homeschooling. Now, I had to do a lot of deschooling first, and that's my first advice to moms. You have to de-school yourself, but it takes a lot of time, especially if you're not sure where to go. And now, 23 years later, I have been homeschooling for 23 years. I have 11 children. I've still got a few to go. I have not only been able to enjoy this new method of homeschooling and has taken all of my stress away, but it has allayed some of my early fears of, well, yeah, the stress is gone, but is this going to be enough? Are they going to be prepared enough? What if they need to go to college? And so now I've had several go to college, did great. I'll tell you about that more later on, but I've had time to see that it works and it can work for you too. So what I've done is taken all my years of research and reading and studying, and I've just condensed it down to a very short, small snippet. So in this video, I'm going to tell you exactly why we have this homeschooling stress and exactly what you can do about it. So I'm just gonna now pan my camera to some slides to give you some visual aids, and I hope that you love what you learned today, and I can't wait to get to know you and hear your story. So let's jump in. There is a very specific reason why you feel stressed out about homeschooling, and I'm about to tell you what that is. But first, I need you to think about some things. Do you remember the almost unbelievable fact about Galileo from when you studied about him in high school, or maybe you've read to your children about him? He is a man we now admire for his incredible contributions to science as an astronomer. But did you know that he was questioned by the Roman Inquisition of the Church, publicly threatened to be tortured, and finally convicted of heresy and placed under house arrest until he died, all for saying that the sun was the center of the solar system, something so obvious to all of us now. It would be 116 years after Galileo's death before society laid down their stubborn prejudices and accepted what he had tried to prove. There's another man whose name you might not recognize is Ignaz Semmelweis. He was a Hungarian doctor in the mid-1840s. He worked in the maternity ward, and he noticed that the death rate for new mothers was significantly higher in the ward staffed by doctors than the ward staffed by midwives. So after some experimenting and research, he found the difference. The doctors were performing autopsies and going directly to deliver babies without washing their hands. He had them start washing their hands, and the death rate drastically dropped. He found an answer that was actually saving lives. Do you think the medical community gave him an award and rejoiced at this finding? No, he was banned from practicing medicine, had his license taken away, and they returned to the practice of not washing their hands. He had discovered germs before the microscope, but they did not want to believe what they thought was a crazy idea, that there could be something invisible causing death, because they were smarter than that. I know you're wondering what Galileo and Semmelweis have to do with being stressed out about homeschooling, and here it is. I have some things to share with you that will remove so much of your stress in homeschooling. Some of the things I share in this course will free you up and bring joy to your homeschooling journey, giving your children a fantastic education. There's one catch. Some of these ideas about education are pretty radical to contemporary methods, so you're going to have to allow yourself to consider the possibility that something we've thought about one way for a long time may at least not be the only way. There was actually a metaphor named after Semmelweis known as the Semmelweis reflex or Semmelweis effect. It's a reflex-like tendency to reject new evidence or new knowledge because it contradicts established norms, beliefs, or paradigms. Challenging the status quo of a long-standing idea like Galileo and Semmelweis did, like I'm going to do in this course, is hard, but it's very important. I quit homeschooling about 6 years ago. What I mean is I finally realized after 15 years of homeschooling, the reason I was so stressed out about homeschooling was because I was home schooling. To say it differently, we've stressed out about homeschooling because we are so focused on schooling our children instead of educating them. And see, a lot of us think those are the same thing. Most of us are probably first generation homeschoolers, and we took what we think to be the essence of education and brought it home and started schooling at home. And I say with John Taylor Gatto, a retired veteran school teacher that you really need to study, look at his books. He passed away, but he has such great information. He said, school and education are not the same thing. They're not even distantly related. Before I started homeschooling, I taught high school English. Most people think teaching school is an advantage to homeschooling. I believe the opposite is true because I was so strongly conditioned to do school that I really didn't have a grasp at all of a real education. So I'm 23 years into this thing, and I feel like I'm just beginning to grasp what a real education is. But we've all been strongly conditioned about what education is supposed to look like. It's the only narrative we know. As a teacher, I got caught up in filling in the blanks, checking off boxes, turning in my neat little papers. I like boxes. I like checking things off, and I like neat rows of stuff. The school system also likes those neat, organized things because it's easy. It's easy to enforce, and it's easy to measure, and it's easy to take up time with. I liked the classroom. It was symmetrical and uniform. The problem is our children are not symmetrical and uniform or easy to measure. I thought the classroom was set up for learning, but school is set up the way it is because a lot of wrong reasons. For one, schooling is about measuring outcomes. And the only way to measure things is by testing. And testing can't really measure understanding. It can't measure wisdom. It can't measure character. It can't measure skill or creativity or so many other forms of intelligence or things that encompass an education. It can only measure facts and things students memorize and things students forget. Testing measures only a sliver of what makes a person educated, but the methods of the classroom are driven largely by a methodology of testing. And why does schooling want to measure outcome? Because they want to create a certain outcome. There's a reason it's called standardized test. The problem is our children are not standard by any means, but schooling is a system by which they are encouraged to be standard, really forced, to be as close to everyone else as possible. They do that on purpose, by the way. The educational system is after a product, and those who don't measure up on the test aren't viewed as just different or having different strengths. They are automatically disqualified from the game and labeled because they deviated from the standard. I believe this is one of the greatest tragedies of the system and has hurt so many children. Most of you may know the story behind how mass compulsory schooling came to be, and so you can understand that education isn't the motive. If you don't know the story, I recommend John Taylor Gatto's book, The Underground History of Education. It will blow you away. Now, there's a reason I'm talking so much about the classroom and the way it operates, because you're thinking, well, how does this concern me? I'm homeschooling. I'm talking about
school because we have brought school home too much. We've brought the methods of the classroom home and called it homeschooling. But most of us really follow the schooling that we came out of. And so this connection is really important. So back when I taught school, I'm in the classroom teaching diagramming sentences one day, and most of my students hated it and they didn't understand it. And as a teacher, I just got angry. Why? Because the textbook said to diagram sentences, and they would be tested on whether they knew how to place an adjective clause. And if the textbook said they needed to learn it, if they don't learn it, they won't be educated. That was my thought process. Besides that, I love diagramming sentences, so I didn't get it. But guess what? Most people who learn to communicate well, even those who make a living communicating, do so whether they ever diagram sentences or not. The whole point, or what should be the point, is learning to use language well. That's the educating part. Now, we're told that diagramming sentences is going to help us do that. And I began to realize it right there in the classroom 23 years ago, although I understand it so much better now. I needed to get my mind off of tests and performance and honestly fear and start caring about real education. What they needed to learn, what they wanted to learn, and how they learn. And what I learned there was the beginning of this fabulous journey of understanding the difference between schooling and education. And it has made a radical, wonderful difference in our home educating. So the process started when I began thinking about the things we were teaching. Now I'll use diagramming sentences as an example. When a student asked me to explain why we diagram sentences, I spouted off my scholarly answer about how the more we understand parts of speech, the better communicators we become. That sounds like a good explanation, right? But I had taken so many advanced grammar courses in college, and I knew deep down that diagramming sentences wasn't at the heart of learning to communicate well. You see, language is a breathing, living thing. We begin learning it as soon as we're born. I don't know a mother who has bought a formal language curriculum for her babies. And we know that learning a language is complicated and important. It's not something we can afford to fail at. But children, under normal circumstances, will learn the English language. Not just that, they learn grammar. You don't have to explain to a child that if they want to make a word plural, they need to add an S. Did you know they still teach that in school? You have worksheets, if you remember, to make a word plural, add an S. To make a word past tense, add ed. You don't have to teach a child to conjugate verbs. He learns that naturally. But we go over and over and over it. Why do they teach that? Because measuring the definition of a simple rule of grammar is much easier than measuring its proper use. So they make us memorize rules about things we already know how to do. So it really helps us to understand that testing these measurable definitions drives much of the way schooling works. Fast forward to my life now as a homeschooling mom, and we have done very little formal grammar, and I mean very little. And I love grammar. I think learning to communicate well is probably the most important part of a good academic education. But grammar is only a means to an end. It's just a tool. Better communication is the goal. We learn to communicate well by reading it, copying it, hearing it, doing it. Albert Einstein said there's no real learning apart from experience. The only real learning happens by doing. Now, if I were to ask you, what a predicate adjective is or subjunctive mood of a verb, could you define that? Probably not, but yet you have no problem using those things when you're communicating. How is that? Because communication is a basic part of our existence. We learn it, and we learn it well without analyzing the syntax because we need language. A fabulous chef doesn't become fabulous by studying the molecules of the food. He becomes fabulous by using the food and experimenting with the flavors. Understand something. You don't have to throw out your grammar book if you're not ready to make that kind of leap. But you do not have to be enslaved to it either. Thinking that if you don't do it, your kids are going to not going to learn what they need to learn. Moms come to me often describing a scene of wailing and gnashing of teeth because Susie can't get past diagramming sentences. Mom's crying, Susie's crying, they hate homeschooling. No, it doesn't have to be like that. Throw it out. She's going to be fine. And I don't think that's teaching your child. I don't think that's teaching your child to give up. There are plenty of areas in life where we can teach tenacity and discipline without making learning miserable for them. I don't think we need to sacrifice the joy of homeschooling on the altar of, quote, teaching diligence. So I mentioned that we've done very little formal grammar, but yet all my kids write well. Several of them write really well, and they correct grammar when they hear something that's wrong. They know correct grammar usage, and that's what we're after. And I know some of you are wondering, I agree, but what about when they need to go to college and they need to know those things for entrance exams or what have you? Don't we have to jump through the hoops to make sure they're prepared? The short answer is no, you don't. A couple of other answers. Ironically, after all that memorization of terms in school, most college entrance exams will test grammar by usage. So it won't say, identify the part of speech of this word. Instead, it will have an underlined passage, and you have to say whether it's correct or needs to be replaced with the correct option. Secondly, taking a crash course, you can even take them online before a test, is very helpful, especially when they already have a good grasp of the subject. So it's not as if our children can't take tests unless we put them through 5 years of grammar. You see what I'm saying? We can focus our time on more meaningful learning. I have a lot more proof now of this because there was a time when I'll admit I had some underlying fears, wondering if it would in fact be enough, not doing intense grammar, if one of my children wanted to go to college. Well, my married daughter got the notion she wanted to go to nursing school before the Lord gave her a child. When she took her entrance exams, she passed with flying colors, didn't have to take even one remedial course, which isn't the worst thing, by the way. So that played out well. Well, then another daughter of mine also decided to go to nursing school. She ended up finishing her associate, and she wanted to go more into mission work. But she was top of her class in every single class. When her English professor, when she wrote her essay in her English class, this was the first time she had ever written an essay. He emailed her and asked if he could use her essay to show the class as an example. Mostly all we had done at that point is copy work. So it gave me a lot of confidence to trust the process. Now, if you have, a child who he's a visual learner, he may love diagramming sentences, let him diagram sentences. I'm not saying diagramming is bad, but I'm trying to help you understand it's not necessary to reach our educational goals. If it's hindering the joy of your journey, close the book. And that's one big part of what will free you up as a homeschooling parent. So I just spent a lot of time talking about one tiny aspect because I want to force you to think about this. What is your goal as a homeschooling parent? We now practice what I call a relaxed method of homeschooling, and not only has it brought us so much freedom, taken away so much stress, but as a veteran homeschooling mom, I've got the experience to prove it works. With 6 children graduated and 2 having gone to college, I have seen proof that you can homeschool without the stress and still be certain your kids will be prepared for what they need. If you want to learn more about how we implement this relaxed method, grab my short course and be on your way to a stress-free